April 2, 1978, Coral Gables, Florida. A warm Sunday afternoon that should have been quiet and uneventful turned into a scene of chaos that shook the community to its core. Officer Luis Pena, a respected husband, father, and dedicated police officer, pulled over a car for a routine traffic stop. In a matter of seconds, the situation escalated into deadly violence. Pena was shot and killed where he stood, and his partner, Officer Gary Spell, barely survived the ambush. The man behind the gun? 27-year-old Cuban immigrant Manuel Valle, who fled the scene, sparking a manhunt that ended with his capture 2 days later. But the story didn't end there. Valle's conviction and death sentence launched a legal battle that stretched over 33 years, making him one of Florida's longest-serving death row inmates. Appeals, retrials, and debates over whether decades on death row constituted cruel and unusual punishment kept the case in the headlines, and kept Pena's family waiting for justice. Tonight, we take you inside the last 24 hours of Manuel Valle. His final meal, last words, and execution. Subscribe now for more jaw-dropping true crime stories you can't look away from. To truly understand the man at the center of this story, we must travel back to Havana, Cuba, in 1950, a country on the edge of political revolution. This is where Manuel Valle was born, in a time when Fidel Castro's movement was just beginning to reshape the island's future. Valle's early years were marked by hardship, as Cuba underwent sweeping changes that forced many families to make difficult choices about their futures. Like countless Cuban exiles of the era, Manuel's family sought a better life across the Florida Straits, leaving behind their homeland in search of freedom and opportunity. Arriving in Miami as a young man, Manuel entered a city that was vibrant but tense. The 1970s were a period of enormous change for South Florida. Cuban immigrants were pouring in, reshaping the city's identity, while poverty, crime, and cultural clashes made survival difficult for those on the margins. For Valle, the American dream was elusive. He struggled to adapt to life in a new country, facing language barriers, discrimination, and the constant pressure to make ends meet. He found himself drifting, unable to fully integrate into the community that was supposed to offer him a fresh start. As the years went on, Valle's troubles grew. He became involved in petty crimes and soon found himself on the wrong side of the law. One of his most serious early offenses was being caught as a convicted felon in possession of a firearm, a charge that signaled a dangerous path ahead. Rather than finding stability, Valle's life became increasingly unstable, and the streets of Miami became both his refuge and his trap. Friends and acquaintances later described him as restless, quick-tempered, and often in trouble. It was clear that Manuel Valle was a man heading toward a breaking point, one that would ultimately erupt in deadly violence on that fateful day in April 1978. The sun hung high over the streets, casting a warm glow on what should have been an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Officer Luis Pena, a 34-year-old husband, father, and respected Coral Gables police officer, was on routine patrol when he spotted a dark Chevrolet Camaro speeding through a red light. To most, it was just another careless driver. But to Pena, it was his job to act. He activated his patrol lights, pulled the car over, and approached the driver, 27-year-old Manuel Valle, never realizing that this stop would become the last of his career and the end of his life. What unfolded next was witnessed by Officer Gary Spell, who arrived moments later as backup. When Spell pulled up, he saw Valle sitting inside Officer Pena's patrol car, appearing calm as Pena spoke into his radio. Dispatch confirmed that the Camaro was stolen. Those words, routine as they may have seemed, triggered a deadly chain of events. Valle stepped out of the patrol car, walked back toward the Camaro as if complying, but instead reached inside, retrieved a firearm, and turned back toward Pena with chilling precision. The next moment shattered the calm of the afternoon. A single gunshot cracked through the air, striking Officer Pena in the neck and dropping him instantly. Officer Spell's world spun into chaos. Valle then turned his weapon toward Spell and fired twice. Both bullets struck his back, but Spell's bulletproof vest stopped them cold, saving his life by inches. The force of the impact knocked him back, but he survived. Valle wasted no time. He bolted from the scene, disappearing into the streets, leaving behind a mortally wounded officer and a partner in shock. Police radio chatter erupted with panic. Officer down. Shots fired. Sirens wailed as units raced to the scene, but by the time they arrived, Officer Luis Pena was gone. In a matter of seconds, a loving husband and father had been stolen from his family, a police department was left reeling, and a community was gripped by grief and outrage. Coral Gables would never forget this day. One man's decision, one pull of a trigger, had turned a routine traffic stop into a tragedy that changed countless lives. And as the sound of gunfire faded, one question lingered: how does a simple stoplight violation lead to murder, and what could drive a man to pull the trigger on a police officer in cold blood? 2 days after the shocking murder of Officer Luis Pena, the state of Florida was on edge. The murder of a police officer is one of the most serious crimes imaginable, and law enforcement knew they had to move fast before Manuel Valle could disappear for good. A massive manhunt unfolded, with officers from multiple jurisdictions working around the clock, their radios buzzing with updates and leads. Roadblocks were set up, helicopters scanned the highways from above, and detectives followed every tip that came in. The tension was thick in the air when Valle was finally located in Deerfield Beach. Police moved swiftly, surrounding the area with tactical precision. The arrest was tense and dramatic. Officers with weapons drawn ordered Valle to the ground. The moment was charged with emotion, as the man who had brazenly gunned down a police officer now lay face down in the dirt, hands cuffed tightly behind him, as if the weight of justice had finally caught up. But the drama didn't end there. Valle's trial would become one of the most closely followed legal battles in Florida's history, attracting national attention and turning the courtroom into a battleground between the defense and the prosecution. Valle faced 3 major charges: first-degree murder for the cold-blooded killing of Officer Luis Pena, attempted murder for firing on Officer Gary Spell, whose life was saved only by the bulletproof vest that stopped Valle's round, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Each charge added weight to an already damning case. The prosecution presented witness testimony, police reports, and ballistic evidence that pieced together the horrifying events of April 2, 1978. Officer Gary Spell's testimony was particularly powerful, as he described in painstaking detail the night his partner was killed right in front of him. His voice was steady, but the emotional weight was undeniable as he told the jury how he heard the crack of Valle's gun, felt the impact against his chest, and realized that his bulletproof vest was the only thing standing between him and death. The courtroom was silent as Spell pointed at Valle, identifying him as the man who tried to take his life. The prosecution built a compelling case, arguing that Valle acted with premeditation and had every opportunity to walk away, but instead chose violence. They emphasized the betrayal of trust, noting that Officer Pena had treated Valle respectfully up until the moment he was shot. The defense attempted to argue mitigating factors, but the jury was not swayed. After long deliberations, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty on all charges. When the judge pronounced the sentence of death, the courtroom erupted with emotion. Some members of Officer Pena's family wept openly, clinging to one another, while supporters in the gallery nodded in approval. Outside the courthouse, the public's outrage was matched by their relief. Justice, at least in the legal sense, had been served. Citizens gathered in vigils, honoring Officer Pena's memory and praising the bravery of Officer Spell, who survived to testify. This case not only marked a turning point for the Pena family but also sent a message across Florida that killing a police officer would carry the ultimate price. The trial reignited debates about capital punishment, with some calling for even swifter justice and others questioning whether the death penalty truly brings closure. So here's the question I leave you with. When a jury delivers a death sentence, does it truly close the chapter for the grieving family, or does it open a new, painful journey through years of appeals, court hearings, and reliving the worst day of their lives over and over again? After Manuel Valle was sentenced to death, many expected the case to end quickly, but in reality this was just the beginning of a legal saga that would stretch on for more than 3 decades, turning into one of Florida's longest and most contentious death row cases. Valle became a symbol of the slow and grinding machinery of capital punishment in America, as his case wound its way through appeal after appeal, retrial after retrial, and a series of high-stakes hearings that tested the patience of both the justice system and the family of Officer Luis Pena. Valle's attorneys fought relentlessly, filing motion after motion to delay his execution, arguing that he had been denied a fair trial and that key evidence and mitigating factors were overlooked during sentencing. One of their central arguments centered on Valle's mental health. They claimed that his psychological state had deteriorated over time, that he had suffered from cognitive decline and depression after years in solitary confinement, and that executing a man after such a prolonged period amounted to nothing less than cruel and unusual punishment, a direct violation of the Eighth Amendment. Legal scholars, mental health experts, and death penalty critics weighed in, sparking national debates about whether leaving someone to languish on death row for over 30 years transforms a sentence into psychological torture rather than justice. Valle's legal team brought these arguments all the way to the Florida Supreme Court and even petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court for a stay of execution. Each time, the courts were forced to balance the rights of the condemned against the need for closure for the victim's family and the public's demand for justice. Experts called Valle's case a textbook example of death row syndrome, a phenomenon describing the severe mental anguish inmates face while living under the constant threat of execution for decades, often in near total isolation. These appeals delayed his execution several times, frustrating law enforcement officials and reopening emotional wounds for the Pena family every time a new hearing was scheduled. Meanwhile, Valle sat in a small death row cell year after year, watching other inmates come and go, some executed, others having their sentences overturned. Each time his execution was scheduled, a flurry of last-minute appeals would buy him more time, but never freedom. Journalists began to question whether the punishment was still serving its purpose after so many years had passed, and whether society was truly safer for keeping him alive for 3 decades before carrying out the ultimate sentence. The drawn-out legal battle also reignited fierce public debate about the death penalty itself. Supporters of capital punishment argued that Valle's case was proof that the system was too slow and too lenient, forcing Officer Pena's family to relive their trauma repeatedly. Opponents countered that his case demonstrated why the death penalty should be abolished altogether, pointing out the staggering costs of decades-long litigation, the possibility of wrongful convictions in other cases, and the mental suffering inflicted by leaving a man in limbo for most of his adult life. As the clock ticked toward the inevitable, Manuel Valle's final 24 hours at Florida State Prison unfolded with a haunting precision that only death row can deliver. The day began quietly at dawn, with the first pale rays of sunlight filtering through the narrow bars of his death row cell. Guards moved with a calm, almost ceremonial professionalism. This was not just another day. For Valle, every second now carried a heavy finality. His last day was mapped out hour by hour, each step dictated by strict prison protocol. Valle was given the opportunity to shower, shave, and dress in clean prison whites, the standard uniform for a condemned inmate's last moments. The warden and chaplain visited him to explain the procedure for the evening, their voices measured, their expressions solemn. Inmates on the row grew unusually quiet, knowing what was coming. For years Valle had been one of them, and by nightfall he would no longer be. When it came time for his last meal, Valle was served a simple but telling request: fried chicken breast, white rice, garlic toast, peach cobbler, and an ice-cold Coca-Cola. As he ate, witnesses said he appeared calm, reflective, and eerily composed, savoring each bite as though stretching out the time he had left. This small act of humanity, a final meal, stood in stark contrast to the brutal violence that had brought him here, reminding everyone watching that despite his crime, he was still a man about to die. Throughout the day, Valle made use of his final privileges. He placed a last phone call, speaking with the few people still in his life who would take his call. He also spent time with a spiritual advisor, engaging in quiet prayer and reflection, preparing himself for what was coming. Prison staff later said there was no sign of panic, no desperate attempt to cling to life, only a man facing the consequences of his actions with resignation. As the sun began to set, the atmosphere inside the prison grew even heavier. Outside the prison gates, a small crowd gathered, some there to support Officer Luis Pena's family, some protesting the execution, holding candles and signs calling for an end to the death penalty. Inside the witness room, Officer Pena's loved ones sat silently, waiting for the moment they had been anticipating for over 3 decades. For them, this was not a moment of celebration but one of closure, a chance to see justice finally carried out. As the final hour arrived, the prison fell into a solemn hush. At the scheduled time, Manuel Valle was escorted from the death watch cell to the execution chamber at Florida State Prison. The walk was short but unbearably heavy, each step echoing like a final countdown to the end. The execution chamber was stark and clinical, its white walls and glaring lights giving the scene an eerie sense of detachment. Valle was guided onto the padded gurney, his arms and legs secured with thick leather straps. Witnesses, including Officer Luis Pena's family, reporters, and state officials, watched from behind a glass partition, their faces tense and unreadable. Once Valle was secured, the warden stepped forward and, in accordance with procedure, asked him if he had any last words. Valle looked up, paused for a moment, and declined to make a final statement. There was no apology, no message to the family of Officer Pena, and no final thoughts, only silence. The warden gave a nod, and the execution team proceeded. The IV lines had already been placed and the first chemical, a sedative, began to flow, quickly rendering Valle unconscious. His breathing slowed and within moments his chest barely moved. The second drug followed, paralyzing his muscles and preventing any visible movement. The final drug, designed to stop the heart, was administered next. The room was still, save for the faint hum of the equipment, as the process quietly ran its course. At exactly 7:14 p.m. on September 28, 2011, the warden pronounced Manuel Valle dead. Inside the witness room, Officer Pena's family remained composed, some holding hands, others quietly shedding tears. It was not a moment of celebration but one of solemn closure, a justice they had waited over 3 decades to see. Outside, the media quickly reported the news, and crowds gathered beyond the prison gates reacted in mixed ways. Supporters of the death penalty called it long overdue justice, while protesters held candles and signs reading "Stop Executions," renewing the debate over whether such a delayed punishment was justice or vengeance. Legal commentators on television that night revisited the decades of appeals, asking if justice delayed was justice denied, or justice perfected. As we close this story, we remember Officer Luis Pena, a dedicated husband, father, and protector of his community, whose life was stolen on April 2, 1978. For his family, these 33 years were filled with hearings, appeals, and painful reminders of that tragic night. And yet, in 2011, justice was finally carried out, bringing an end to one of Florida's longest death row cases. But this case forces us to ask difficult questions. Should death row have time limits? Does waiting decades for an execution bring justice, or turn it into something else entirely? So I leave you with this: did justice take too long, or was justice finally served? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think 33 years on death row is fair punishment, or cruel and unusual? And if you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping true crime documentaries just like this one.